It was the kind of cold that sank into your bones. The kind that made people clutch their coats tighter, rush across wet sidewalks, and keep their eyes on the ground to avoid meeting anyone's gaze. The sky was a dull charcoal gray, hanging heavy above the city like a blanket of sorrow. Rain fell steadily, not in a torrential storm, but in a persistent, icy drizzle that chilled everything it touched as Joe wiped the counter for the third time, his hands working by habit more than need. The inside of Joe's diner smelled of fried onions, coffee, and warm apple pie, comforting scents that masked the loneliness he'd grown used to after years of running the place alone. The clatter of forks on plates and the occasional low chuckle of a customer filled the air. A radio played softly in the corner, a song from the 80s barely audible over the background hum of life, but Joe's eyes weren't on the counter. They kept drifting toward the glass window, fogged slightly from the difference between the warm interior and the chill outside. Just beyond it, half hidden in the shadows, stood a boy. He was small, painfully small, thin as a rail, with a hoodie soaked straight through and sticking to his fragile frame. His hands were stuffed into his sleeves, his jeans darkened with wet patches, and his shoes were torn at the solace. He wasn't begging. He wasn't tapping on the glass or waving for attention. He just stood there. Staring in, Joe noticed how the boy's eyes never wandered. He wasn't looking at the people. He wasn't watching the waitress carry out plates. He was staring directly at a half-eaten grilled cheese sandwich on someone's plate, his hunger so deep it had frozen him still. Joe's heart gave a strange twist, that familiar mix of pain and instinct. He'd seen plenty of people down on their luck. This neighborhood had no shortage of that. But there was something in the boy's eyes, something beyond hunger, something like silence, like a scream that had never been voiced. He tossed the towel aside and walked toward the door, ignoring the curious glance of the waitress. As he opened it, a gust of wind slapped his face and the cold hit him like a wave. The boy flinched, almost stepping back. Joe didn't smile. He never did when it wasn't earned, but his voice was softer than usual. "You hungry, kid?" The boy didn't answer. His eyes flicked up, then back down. There was shame in them. Not the kind that comes from guilt, but the kind that comes from long, crushing deprivation. Joe had seen it before. Hunger that becomes your identity. Silence that becomes your language. Joe nodded toward the warm glow behind him. "Come on. Ain't nobody judging you in there?" Still, the boy hesitated. His small fingers tightened around his sleeve cuffs, as if afraid this was a trick. A test. The world had not been kind to him. It had taught him that offers usually came with consequences. So Joe tried something else. "I'll make you a grilled cheese, hot, extra butter on the crust. Sound good?" Something shifted. The boy gave the smallest nod, almost invisible. Joe opened the door wider and stepped aside. The boy moved slowly, cautiously, as if he might bolt at any moment. He entered the diner like a ghost, dripping water with each step, drawing a few stares from customers, but Joe shot them a look that silenced them all. He led the boy to the corner booth, the warmest one near the kitchen, far from the door. "No need to talk," Joe said as he handed him a paper napkin. "Just sit tight." The boy's lips trembled as he lowered himself onto the vinyl seat. It made a soft creak beneath his tiny weight. He didn't look up, he didn't say thank you, but Joe didn't expect it. Kindness shouldn't come with conditions. In the kitchen, Joe worked with practiced hands, 2 slices of thick bread, a generous handful of cheddar, a heavy press on the griddle. He made tomato soup too, not because the kid asked for it, but because he knew it was the kind of warmth that stayed with you. He placed the plate in front of the boy without a word. The boy stared at the food like it wasn't real. Then after a long pause, he took the first bite. And when he did, his shoulders dropped, just a little. Just enough to know that something inside had let go. Joe didn't ask his name. Didn't ask where he was from. Didn't press him with the questions. He knew others would have. Instead, he just went back behind the counter, poured himself a coffee, and watched the boy eat. Outside, the rain continued. But inside that booth, under flickering diner lights, something sacred happened. A child was seen, fed, and warmed, not just with food, but with dignity, and even though Joe didn't know it yet, That single act of quiet compassion was going to change his life forever. Asterisk, asterisk, the days turned into weeks, and the weeks blurred into months. Autumn's chill melted into winter's deep freeze, yet every evening, like clockwork, the boy would appear outside Joe's diner, waiting silently in the same shadowed spot just outside the window. Asterisk, eventually, he stopped hesitating at the door. Now he came in quietly, shoulders hunched, eyes still downcast, but something in him had shifted. There was a silent trust growing, layer by fragile layer. Asterisk, Joe never pushed him to speak. He never demanded a name, never asked where he went after dinner, or who, if anyone, was waiting for him at night. Joe had always believed that the heart speaks loudest in silence, and this boy's silence screamed of a world that had been cruel, relentless, and unfair. But actions became their language. Joe began leaving things for the boy, little things that spoke volumes. A worn but warm navy coat hanging on the back of the booth one evening. A pair of fresh socks and new sneakers another night, loosely tied and resting by his seat. A second sandwich wrapped in foil always slipped quietly into the boy's pocket. Without a word, with a note that simply read, "Just in case." Asterisk, the boy never rejected them. He also never asked for them. That was what made it sacred. Asterisk, there were moments, brief and rare, when the boy would glance up at Joe while eating. Just a flicker of a look, a moment of eye contact that spoke of a rising gratitude too heavy for his young throat to shape into words. Joe would nod gently in return, a man of few words himself. Asterisk, the boy still hadn't told Joe his name. But one night, after finishing his grilled cheese and pie, he stood up and hovered by the table, fiddling with the sleeves of his hoodie. Asterisk, he turned his head slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you, Mr. Joe. You're the first person who ever looked at me like I mattered." Then he left, vanishing into the night as silently as he'd arrived. Joe stood behind the counter, coffee mug in hand, stunned. Asterisk, not by the words, but by the quiet pain in them. The weight they carried. The image of a child so starved for kindness that even a grilled cheese sandwich could stitch the edges of a shattered self-worth. Asterisk, that night, Joe sat alone in the diner long after closing. He didn't know where the boy slept, whether he had family, whether he was safe. All he knew was he'd be waiting again tomorrow. But tomorrow never came. Asterisk, not for weeks. Not for months. Asterisk, the booth remained empty. The window fogged over without a shadow behind it. Joe waited. Every night, watching, hoping, but the boy never returned. 15 long years passed. Asterisk, the world changed faster than Joe could keep up. New apartment buildings went up. Old businesses closed. Neon signs replaced. Warm storefronts. But Joe's diner remained the same, stubbornly timeless, with its chipped leather booths, buzzing neon sign, and faded photo wall behind the counter. Asterisk, Joe aged 2. The once broad shoulders bent slightly, the dark hair turned white, and the strong hands began to tremble just a little when he poured coffee. But his heart, his quiet, giving heart, remained untouched by time. Asterisk, one bitter morning in February, while refilling the sugar canister near the register, Joe felt a sharp pain shoot through his chest. His breath caught, the room tilted. Dizziness overtook him like a wave. The coffee pot slipped from his hand and shattered on the floor. The waitress screamed. Asterisk, customers rushed to help. Someone called 911. Asterisk, Joe barely remembered the ride in the ambulance. The sirens seemed distant, like a dream. His world faded in and out, the pain like fire in his chest. By the time he reached the A, he was unconscious. Asterisk, at City Memorial Hospital, the trauma team sprang into action. Machines beeped, nurses called out vitals, and a crash cart was wheeled in. Asterisk, a young nurse handed over the patient's file to the incoming cardiac surgeon. Emergency coronary occlusion. 72 years old, unconscious, names Joseph Collins. No family listed. Dr. Evan Miles flipped open the file and froze. Asterisk, for a moment. He didn't speak. Asterisk, he stared at the name. Joseph Collins's pulse suddenly louder in his ears than the heart monitor. Asterisk, he looked at the man lying unconscious on the table face. Gaunt, skin pale, the years heavy on his frame, but the face Still familiar, it couldn't be. Boo asterisk. The surgical team looked to Dr. Miles, awaiting instructions. His voice was firm, but his hands trembled ever so slightly. This man gave me life, he said softly. Let's return the favor. He scrubbed it in, his eyes never leaving Joe as they wheeled him into the OR. Inside, beneath bright surgical lights, time folded in on itself. Asterisk Evan didn't see the years, the machines, or the hospital anymore. Asterisk he saw a small diner booth, a steaming bowl of tomato soup, a man who never asked for anything but gave everything. Asterisk, and now Evan would give him back the only thing that mattered. Asterisk, a chance to live. Asterisk. When Joe awoke, the first thing he felt wasn't pain. It just then. The door creaked open. Asterisk, and stepped a tall man in a white coat, clipboard in hand, early 30s. Clean-cut, confident, his face calm, but his eyes held something deeper in intensity, a memory. Asterisk. Joe squinted him. It had been just 3 hours since the snow had begun to fall heavier, blanketing the streets in white silence. Daniel stood outside the city's only family shelter, an aging brick building with flickering lights in the hallway and a smell of dampness that never left the air. Still, it was warm, safe, and tonight there was a room available, just one. He had walked Lena and her children to the shelter himself. Emma had held Noah's hand tightly, both walking as if unsure whether this was real or another cold dream. Lena had said very little during the walk, but Daniel could feel her walls beginning to lower. As they stood in the lobby, a volunteer approached them with a clipboard. A 1-room, 3 beds, she said kindly, eyeing the kids. You're lucky someone just checked out? Lena nodded slowly, her voice shaky. Thank you. Daniel handed her the paperwork and quietly paid for the first week's stay. Lena noticed. You didn't have to do that. I didn't, he agreed. But I wanted to. Emma tugged at his coat again. Will you come back tomorrow? He knelt to meet her gaze. If it's okay with your mom, I'd like to. Lena gave the faintest smile. She could use someone who listens. Daniel slipped his card into her hand again, firm this time. Lena, the offer is real. We could use someone at the store. Someone reliable. And if you need help getting the kids into school or daycare, I have connections. Lena stared at the card. I haven't worked since Noah was born. I've never done retail. Daniel shrugged gently. Everyone starts somewhere. You've survived worse than a grocery store. That night, inside the modest room with creaking walls and clean sheets, Lena sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the card again. Emma was already asleep, curled up next to Noah under 2 donated blankets. They looked peaceful for the first time in weeks. She ran her fingers across the name, Daniel Carter, owner and CEO Carter's Auto and Grocery. Could one choice really change everything? She didn't know. But for the first time in months, she wanted to find out. The next morning she called. 2 weeks passed, and the world didn't end. It began. The same alley where Lena once knelt in the snow had now been replaced by routine. Daniel had picked up the broken cart the same day she started work and sent it for repairs, not just repairs, but a full transformation. The cart returned not as a symbol of desperation, but of dignity. Its wood was now reinforced, the wheel replaced, the handles sanded and stained. Across its side, painted in soft white letters, were the words, Emma's Kindness Cart, powered by hugs and hope. The cart no longer held rags. Now it carried fresh fruit, hand-knit scarves, small books, and even handmade cards Emma had written with little messages of kindness. On a crisp morning, Emma stood proudly beside it, wearing a clean pink jacket and warm boots. Noah sat on a crate nearby, giggling as he showed off a coloring book to passing shoppers, and there, across the street, stood Lena wearing the store's uniform shirt with pride. She stood at the front door of Carter's Auto and Grocery, holding a clipboard, giving instructions to a delivery man. She looked stronger. Not just fed but alive. Daniel crossed the street with 2 coffees in hand. Morning, team, he called. Emma waved him over. Mr. Daniel, look. I helped a lady who was crying. I gave her one of my hug coupons. Hug coupons? He laughed. She nodded proudly and handed him one. It was a hand-drawn paper square that read, "You look like you need a hug redeem anytime." He read it and felt his throat tighten. "She hugged me back," Emma said. Then she smiled. "You're better at this than I ever was," Daniel murmured. Later that day, as the sun set in golden streaks across the storefront, Daniel and Lena stood side by side, watching their kids play outside on the pavement. With chalk. Lena sipped the coffee. "I never thought I'd say this again, but I feel safe." Daniel looked at her. "And you are." She turned to him. "Why did you help us?" "Really?" He didn't answer right away. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a photo, faded edges curled. A little girl in pigtails sitting on his shoulders, both of them laughing. "This is Lily," he said. "She always used to say that people need more hugs." I didn't know what she meant until the day I lost her. Lena looked at the photo, then at Emma across the street. She would have liked Emma. Daniel smiled. "She already does." As the last light of day faded, Emma ran across the road and wrapped her arms around both of them, and just like that, a girl who once asked for nothing but a hug had rebuilt an entire world, one wart at a time.